Hello friends, it's Dave here from SafeDecks and welcome to another discussion video where we're going to talk about the pros and cons really of physical and digital media. So to help me out with this, I've got two guests with me, one of them who's very pro-physical, the other one who's on Team Digital. So for the physical side we've got Glen from SwitchUp.
How you doing, Dave? Alright, mate?
And on the digital side we've got Cody from Indie Game Pulse.
Hey there, thanks for having me, Dave.
As obviously years have gone by, digital gaming sort of came into existence. And at first I thought, well, I was very much strongly, I like physical games. Digital games don't feel like you're really owning it. But they've become more and more prevalent, and I've basically accepted that and sort of collected more digital games over the years. But I still have a soft spot for physical. I'd rather have physical overall, but I accept the future. But one person who doesn't really accept the future in a way, Glenn, why do you like physical over digital?
I think my biggest, the reason I like physical most, you've just mentioned it, and it's the key point in the argument for me, is that idea of ownership. I like to have a collection that I can physically see. And I mentioned to you, Dave, earlier that this isn't a point that will necessarily resonate with everybody, but because I review games on my channel, I like to keep the digital stuff separate, and that's my work, if you like, in inverted commas. And I like to have my physical collection, which are my personal games, and that's when I want to play something, I go and look at my games and see what I want to play. So it's nice having that distinction between the two. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And so Cody, why do you prefer digital gaming?
I think the biggest factor is kind of convenience. Especially, I play majority on PC. If I switch PCs, if I get a newer PC, I have that library saved. I mean, specifically in my case in Steam, or if you buy from GOG, you can transfer that library easily. You could also do that with physical, sure, but especially in the PC world, physical games they're becoming a rarity. In fact, I don't even look for physical games for PC anymore. For console, sure, and there are, if you look. Right now we're on a video call. If you look behind me, I have a huge board game collection. I love collecting some physical things, but for me, video games are more convenient digitally. They don't take up as much space in my house, although video games are getting smaller physically too, so that's kind of maybe a null point.
Yeah, so on that point of you saying about taking up space, that is where I will talk about digital games, because sometimes with consoles I'm talking about, because that's what I play, especially with the Switch, there's not a lot of space on your Switch for downloading a lot of things. So in that case, you have to buy the extra SD cards. And I recently bought an Xbox Series S as well, and I've got Game Pass on that. But again, I have to download everything, and I can't keep a lot of games on there because of how big some of the file sizes could be. So really, when it comes to physical versus digital, there's two factors I take in, deciding which one to get. One is price, because sometimes the physical costs more, sometimes the digital can cost more, and how much space the download is as well. And one thing I have against digital gaming as well is how it's really, how would you say, affecting physical games or infecting them. Because a lot of games come out physically now and you have to download a patch day one. Yeah. And what's your take on that?
My take on that, for me, if a game's going to be classed as physical, I would prefer it was on the cartridge. I don't mind so much if you have to download. Like we were talking earlier, funnily enough, about the Borderlands series on the Switch, where you might get the game one on the cartridge and then you have to download the others. I don't mind that so much, because if you buy a new Switch or you lend it to a friend, they can download it too. You do have the issue of space still, but at least they can still access what should be on a cartridge. It's when you start getting codes in a box or download codes that it starts to muddy the waters for me. If it's a physical game, you should be able to take that to someone else's Switch and put it in, and they can access whatever should have been on that cartridge,
Yeah, because there was a whole thing when Xbox One was coming out, they were making it so that you couldn't lend your games to a friend, but they went back on that because of the outcry. But do you think that's something that companies will do in the future as people go towards like cloud gaming? And
I think the fact that Microsoft, beg your pardon, tried it shows it's in their minds, but I think the backlash, as you said, has probably pushed that back a few years at least now,
Yeah, and also, so another thing that would support Cody's side as well. I remember when the PSP came out and they released an all-digital version of it. I think it's called PSP Go or something like that. Yeah. and it flopped because people. And I remember at the time thinking, no one's going to want this. But now PS5 and Xbox Series X have all digital versions, and I myself have bought the all digital Xbox Series S. So consoles are going the all digital route now. Do you think that'll come into it in the future with everyone?
I think it will, and especially in the past 1 or 2 years, really, we've seen Xbox Game Pass and kind of games on demand services really grow a lot. I won't say explode because, I mean, it kind of has exploded. Like, even Nvidia has their own service. It's kind of like what Netflix did with Blockbuster. You know, you used to go to Blockbuster and rent your DVDs, and you had a fun time checking out the shelves. Now you just scroll endlessly through Netflix, and it's so convenient. I really think the same is starting to happen with video games, for better or worse. Like, there are things that I do miss about physical games, like you guys were talking about, kind of that ability to share with friends. I have 2 Switch games on my desk now, 2 Zelda games that my friends lent me, and I haven't had time to play them because of work, but it's kind of going that direction where you're kind of buying the right to play a game, but you're not necessarily buying the game itself.
Effectively sort of renting in a way, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
Like with Netflix, if something gets removed off Netflix, it's gone. But at the same time, with physical media, if you lose that DVD or it breaks, that's gone. You're not going to get a free one replaced to you. So it's relevant to films as well, with all these like Disney Plus, Netflix, Amazon Prime, with especially like when people are choosing to stream rather than even go to the cinema nowadays. No, but with Game Pass, it is the whole, like with Netflix, you have so much choice on there that you have your subscription, you have access to everything that's on there. And it's like, what do I play? So I've downloaded so many games on there and then just never play them. Or I'll play them for half an hour and then delete it because I'm like, there's too much more that I need to play still. But I suppose you're getting that as well with your Switch games, aren't you?
Yeah. What I will say is, I don't think for a minute that digital or buying games digitally is a bad thing. I think it's a fantastic thing to be able to do. But I do, as you just said, with Netflix and now with consoles as well, it's that abundance of choice. It can be a bit overbearing. It can be, a bit overwhelming even, really. And I do like, still to this day, being nearly 40, doesn't matter. I like getting a game from the shop and walking home thinking about playing the game, reading the back of the box, or do you know what I mean? Like, there's still something to that that digital gaming just can't reproduce. So this is not about functionality or convenience. This is just that personal feeling that I suppose nostalgia really, isn't it? Experience, isn't it, of going to a shop and buying your game. And even as a older person these days, I still find that, and it's nice. That feeling is still a nice feeling to have,
Middle-aged,
we'll go with that. I like that, yeah.
We're all there.
Yeah, exactly right, yeah. That's it.
But yeah, like you say, all part of the experience. Like, it's kind of like comparing books to Kindle, isn't it?
Yeah.
The smell.
Yeah.
It, like, you read a book from very years ago, the smell just brings those memories back. But on a screen, it's not there.
I think, and again, that's a good point with books, because I'm not much of a reader, so I would happily have a Kindle. I wouldn't feel the need to have books on my shelf. But I suppose growing up with games and being fond of games, it's something about having that physical collection that appeals to me.
Yeah.
Things like Netflix, I'm quite happy to have a lot of it digitally. If there's favourite films, I might have them physically. And if I gamed on a PC, I think I would quite happily accept the Steam route. It wouldn't bother me. But with consoles, it just seems different, and I can't really even explain why, if you know what I mean.
I think Dave and I were talking about this the other day in regards to books. Like, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and it's kind of that same thing. I don't buy a lot of books to have around the house, but if I really enjoy an audiobook, I'll gladly buy the book just to kind of have it around the house, and maybe
Absolutely.
in my older years I'll sit down and reread it physically. But there's something about kind of having it as like a keepsake of the time that you enjoyed reading it. And I think even as I'm on the digital side of games, or digital side of the argument, I can definitely see that coming into play as far as like kind of curating a collection of your favorites.
And you know what's nice as well, Cody, is like I've got kids. My daughter's of an age where she's playing games now. My son's too young. But if I sat down and showed her my Switch and we scrolled through the digital games, that would be fine. That would be nice. And we'd look at the thumbnails and she might want to play one. But if I take her into the room where all my games are stacked on the shelves and show her them and we pick one to play together, again, it's just something different about that. Do you know what I mean? I will say, though, that she spilt a bloody glass of orange juice over my whole Switch collection a few years ago. She wouldn't have been able to do that if it was digital, so that was annoying. But
It would have gone all over your Switch, though.
it would
wouldn't
have done, yeah. But there is something nice about that, just, going into... And I remember that as a kid, not with games, but with VHSs, as we were saying, like sitting down, going to someone else's house and looking at their VHS collection and choosing one to watch and what have you,
Yeah, and sometimes just seeing someone's collection on the wall just sort of gives you an idea about what that person's like as well.
Exactly right, yeah.
Going to go something pro-digital, don't worry. So another thing about digital gaming is the whole preservation side of it. And I'm not talking about like people using emulators or things like that. I'm talking about when companies, re-release games digital, like say Xbox Live Arcade and the Virtual Console, things like that. It's a great convenient way to get those old games, because obviously not everyone's got like the NES, N64 or like the Mega Drive out, but the fact that there's legal ways to play it in collections or something like that, you can just download, and it's not worth them like releasing Super Mario Brothers on a Switch cartridge, is it? But having it on digital is a convenient way to have that game again.
Yeah, I think that's a big factor, but also like we have such I know the three of us have such big backlogs, like that's not a huge factor for us digitally, but it is, like, I think for the mass audience, it's a big deal to kind of, I mean, Final Fantasy is coming out with their digital remasters, and it's a lot of fun to go back and finally revisit those games without potentially using emulators and ROMs and all that stuff. It's, it's out there and it's accessible and it's convenient again.
And on the topic of convenience and sort of preservating these games and this is one where like Nintendo's not there yet with this, but when I bought because I had an Xbox 360, I'd skipped the Xbox One, but then I got an Xbox Series S. The games that I bought digital on the Xbox 360, I could download for free on my Xbox Series S because I've already bought them. Yeah. Nintendo don't allow that. I mean, they did sort of with the Wii to Wii U Virtual Console, they let you buy them for like 99p or something like that, a discount if you already owed it. But on the Switch, if a game came out on the Switch eShop, like Shantae or something like that, you have to buy it again on the Switch eShop. It's not just, even though the eShop accounts are linked, it knows you've already bought it on the Wii U, you still have to buy it again to have it on the Switch. And if Nintendo was to implement, say, a way to let you have these, like if they bring out the next console and it's backwards compatible with all Switch games, but they just let you download all your Switch eShop games for free again if you've already bought them, then that would be a way forward with digital gaming.
Yeah.
Because obviously for games you bought physical in the Xbox 360, I can't download for free on the Series S.
I think when you talk about preservation, this is one side where I would very much agree with how good digital gaming can be. But what I will say is it does again present a problem in that licensed games can be taken off when the licenses run out. And again, if you had the cartridge, you own it, And a lot of my favourite games as a kid on the Super Nintendo were licensed games because you watched the film or the show and then you wanted the game of it. Whether they were good or bad was another story. But, things like Turtles in Time, Batman Returns, these are some of my favourite Super Nintendo games. They're just not, you can't play them anymore unless you still have that physical version, or more or less, I'm sure there are ways and means, but you will never see them on a store. They'll never be on an eShop because of the license.
You sort of had to be there when they were available.
Exactly, and that's one side that worries me with digital, is that it can just all go. In a blink of an eye, it can be taken away, for whatever reason, and the physical side. So whilst I do agree with preservation in terms of keeping something somewhere where it can almost, in theory, never go away because it's there and it's it can go away.
Yeah,
true. Do you know what I mean? And if it couldn't, it would be perfect, but it can, and that's what worries me.
Yeah, and there's also the case of like older Game Boy and NES cartridges are dying because they age and don't last forever. But with digital, that if these libraries are still supported, that could theoretically go on forever.
Right, and that's what I mean. Like, so you're exactly right. The physical games can break, and they can just go out of circulation. People don't want to sell them anymore. You can't find them.
They can get orange juice spilled on them.
They can have, and they do have orange juice spilled on them. Yeah, exactly. But the digital route preserves that, but because of licenses, it just hasn't been perfected yet. I think is my point.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm with it.
I agree, and I think you kind of can get into like the DRM argument too that it's still in an anti-consumer standpoint. It's not good for gamers. It's good for the businesses and the owners. But
Yeah.
I think there's strides being taken. I do think Xbox Game Pass and kind of games on demand are great services for digital. But again, like you said, games can come and go on those as they seemingly please. You always have the option to buy, the digital game itself.
And another thing, talking about we said this earlier about, say, the quality of some games nowadays, and we've had a few recent examples, namely GTA Trilogy, that they have this whole mentality of it can get patched later, so they release an inferior, so I'm told, product.
Yeah.
And I've not played it myself, but and then there's this whole mentality of, but back in the day, in my day, there were a lot of rubbish games out there, but the big companies like Nintendo, like say Capcom, Rockstar as well, they release quality majority of the time. Rockstar back 20 years ago would not have released something like what we got with that GTA trilogy, and but this whole mentality of it can get patched kind of sort of can take away from it. It's like if it can't be patched, they'll release a much better product.
I think what I will say on that is, as much as I'm pro-physical, that's not the fault of digital gaming.
No.
That's companies using it as an an excuse, because patching can be a good thing. It can be used for good, but it's also given people the option to be lazy at times.
Yeah.
And that's not. I don't think that's a knock against digital gaming per se. I think that's just human nature, or the nature of companies, that if we can get out quick, we make more money, let's do it. We'll sort it out later. And as you say, back in the day, on physical cartridges or discs as it was, that's not to say there weren't bad games, because there were, and it was because they were rushed. It was for the same reason, but those big companies wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. And
they do potentially do it now.
Mm-hmm. I was reading this morning about Battlefield 2042 and just how unplayable it is even after its full launch, and the company's kind of like, well, just wait for a patch. But how long, kind of the length of time that we have to wait for those playable patches is getting even longer. Now it could be one month or 2 months from the time you purchase the game to the time where you can actually play it and enjoy it. So I think you're right. It's not the fault of it's not our fault as gamers. It's companies kind of taking advantage of that process and of the ability to push out patches later.
And I think it's funny because I mentioned just now licensed games, and they were the biggest perpetrator of rushing their products out back in the day, because they had to be out in time for the movie.
Yeah.
But I think that philosophy that used to just apply to licensed games now applies to the whole of gaming, because they want to get out as quick as they can. They've got deadlines, and they know they can patch. But as you say, Cody, when? It's not this idea of, I will do it, but when are you going to do it? And sometimes you get roadmaps, and if sometimes it is just pure for improvement. They're going to keep adding content to a game, and that's great. But it's when the game isn't playable, or it's not as good as it should be, and there's this kind of blanket, we'll do it, we'll sort it later. That's when it's...
Yeah, and a problem there as well, because remember Shigeru Miyamoto had that famous quote, it says, a delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is bad forever.
Yeah.
But nowadays that doesn't have truth, because a game can release that's bad, but then get patched and become a good game, but the reviews will still say it's a bad game.
Yeah, exactly. And we all review games, and we've all reviewed games, and I'm sure there'll be reviews on our respective channels where we've said something, and that's not the case anymore. But at that time, that's exactly what the situation was with that game,
Yeah, you go on Metacritic, for example, that's what it was like when it was released, not what it's like now.
Absolutely.
So anyway, the only other thing I was going to say was, and I don't want to see physical go, I mean, it's sort of been dwindling as well, especially with the loss of instruction books as well. Because I'll say it's, and obviously I understand why, because obviously less paper use, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of games though aren't even having digital manuals nowadays. But me and Sophie played Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg the other week on the GameCube, and it's been years since I've played it, Sophie's first time, and I've forgotten how to play it. And we were trying to work out, because there wasn't like guided tutorials in it as much, and we were there trying to work out, how do you do this or that, and then I then I'd forgotten I just got out the instruction book and looked up the moves in there, and man, that brought me back. Like we worked out what to do from the instruction book.
Yeah.
But I mean, that sort of realization and feeling is kind of lost in sort of like the modern digital era as well.
Well, I suppose tutorials have replaced manuals, haven't they?
True.
Those hour-long tutorials at the start of the game are basically what we used to do by reading the book and working out how to play. But a lot of people that support physical are very much about the manuals. Oh, it's a shame we don't have manuals.
Yeah.
I do think it's a shame, but I don't. It's not as big a deal for me, to be honest. It's about having the game that I can. If my daughter wants to play it on her Switch, I can give her the cartridge and let her go and play it, and I can't do that with a digital game. Do you know what I mean? It's more about the practicality of what physical brings rather than a huge nostalgia trip. There is some nostalgia in there, but it's more about that, you know?
Because sometimes, obviously, me and Sophie both own the Switch, and some games we have bought physical just so we can both play it without buying it twice. But also, the whole point is if you got it digital, you can't lend it out to people. But I would say without digital, though, there's some games wouldn't exist at all.
Yeah.
And we've seen some, like indies. I mean, obviously, you're a big indie supporter, aren't you, Cody? And as we both are as well. I don't know if I wasn't sure if you liked indies or not. But,
it's not in the name or anything, but
would we have games like Super Meat Boy or Celeste if we didn't have digital gaming?
And that's a great question. Like, indie games have really kind of blossomed over the last several years because of digital accessibility. They don't have to spend manufacturing costs, shipping costs, all of that. They get a cut taken out based on what platform they sell their digital game on. Yeah, I think digital games are a huge thing for, especially in the indie space. It allows so many more developers and publishers to produce great games. Like you said, Super Meat Boy, Celeste. Yeah, there's just so many games that who knows if they would even make it through the publishing process if it was all digital or all physicals, excuse me.
I've also heard about sort of opening the floodgates for any developer to make any game has resulted in, you see it like on the eShop, a lot of shovelware, a lot of absolute crap. But I would say, obviously there's a lot more games being released nowadays, but I'd say the ratio from good game to bad games probably isn't any different than it was back in the NES days.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of rubbish games, probably more rubbish games than good games back then, but you just didn't hear about them
It's
as
just
much.
a larger volume now too.
The point you just made about those indie devs and it giving them a start and giving them a platform to build on and go from is spot on. You can't argue against that. It's 100% right. What I will say, and maybe this is just me being tight, but if I'm buying a digital game, there's a certain price point I won't go past because I don't feel like I actually own it. And I think as long as it, for me again personally, as long as it doesn't go past that price point, I'm happy to do it. And I think if it does go past that price point, it almost feels like it should have a physical because of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's my take on it. When you're getting games at a £10-15 and these indie teams are building something special, and some of the amazing games we've had due to it, the industry's so much stronger for it. But when they start charging £35-40 for a digital game that's got no physical copy, there's no other choice. I don't like that. And again, maybe that's just my spending habits, and other people wouldn't even blink an eye at doing it. But I think if it starts hitting those price points, it should have a physical copy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Because, I mean, the game must have had must be a bigger budget game if it's getting that price point.
That's my thinking. I might be wrong. I don't know the industry well enough to know if price correlates to budget, but I would say that you would think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah. That's pretty much all I had to say on the topic anyway. So, any final thoughts, Cody? Digital for the future?
Digital for the future, but again, I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm a fence sitter, but I do enjoy some physical goods, specifically books and board games. I don't really have much of a means for playing physical video games anymore on the PC. Even PCs now are built without the means to have a CD or a DVD drive. They're just fully digital. That. So unless you buy an external, but for me it's not worth it. So digital to the 3000s.
I keep being told that the digital future is coming, and I've just got to accept it. So that's fine. I mean, I see it one of two ways: either it doesn't happen and I carry on as I have done forever, or it does happen and I've got a whole bunch of games that are going to become quite rare and wanted, and I sell them and buy myself a nice big yacht. So I can't really lose, to be honest. I don't mind.
What if yachts become all digital?
Yeah, if it's a digital yacht, that would be a problem. Get my feet wet, wouldn't I? But no, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully the two can live in harmony. Let's hope so.
Yeah, again, I overall would rather have them physical, but I think I do understand that one day I'm going to have to surrender to the digital overlords and, just accept our fate.
A bit like Terminator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I support both, really, but I will go physical over digital. Then again, I'm thinking, what if there's like a fire or something, and then that all goes up in flames? But I could just buy another Xbox and download what I've already got.
There you go. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Cody. Do you want to sort of tell people what to expect on your channel?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It was great to chat with both of you. You can find me on YouTube at Indie Game Pulse, also on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, under the same names. We do all things indie, from casual games to roguelites, Metroidvanias. Those are my personal favorites. But we cover a little bit of everything. So if you like indies, come hang out.
Cool. And Glen, I'm sure people know your channel, but
well, yeah. So I'm half of SwitchUp with Mark, my friend Mark. We run SwitchUp. So we're a Switch-centric channel. So if you like the Nintendo Switch, come and have a watch. I'm sure Dave will stick a link somewhere that you can
in the top pinned comment.
In the top pinned comments.
I occasionally write scripts for him.
He does sometimes, yeah. Yeah. I just want to say though, Cody, it's been lovely having a chat with you. It's been really nice talking to you.
Yeah, same to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Cool. So check out both their channels in the top pinned comment, as I said, and check them out. Make sure you subscribe to them if you like what you see. Make sure you subscribe to us as well if you want to. That'd be nice. And let us know in the comments down below what your side you're on. Do you physical, digital? What are your thoughts on it? So thank you very much for listening, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.